I've been wanting to read a history book that does this for years. And as far as I know, this is the first one that has done it. It's called Bullies and Saints by John Dickson. And here is my review. All right, so this book by John Dickson, right, it goes through church history for the last 2,000 years, but it is looking at how we've had some bullies and we've had some saints, right? And the basic idea is that his concept is that Jesus made a beautiful melody of love God and love your neighbor. And in the last 2,000 years, the church sometimes sings that melody right and loves God and loves the neighbor, and other times goes proper out of tune. And so the result is sometimes you look through church history, you see people that are like saints, quote unquote, and then other times you see people who are bullies. And one of the reasons why I like this book so much is because when I had read church history, and I'm not claiming to be a church history expert by no means at all, but what I found sometimes was that there were people that we were kind of taught about as if they were like heroes, people who held up orthodoxy, who taught the proper doctrine. But then when you would look at some of their life and you'd be like, they don't seem like a very nice person. And finally now I feel like that there's a book there, maybe there's others, but this one I feel actually lets you know, yeah, this person wasn't a nice person. This is what they did that was wrong. And so that's really helpful. So, it starts off with the Crusades. Right there at the beginning, it starts with the Crusades, which I think is really important, right? Because that is just a terrible stain on church history. And he doesn't use some of the usual excuses that people give, when they try and explain the Crusades, and he basically says that it was wrong. And he gives some really, shows us that there were people at the time who were saying it was wrong, so it wasn't just a case of everyone thought it was okay. And he has intentionally chosen to not present it as two sides, because I heard him in an interview with Glenn Scrivener. Sorry, Glenn, I'm sure I said your surname wrong just then. Did an interview where he was basically saying, look, I'm judging Christianity by the teachings of Jesus. So Jesus said this, and so I'm judging the church on this. I'm not judging what Muslim soldiers did based on what Jesus said, because that wouldn't be fair. And I thought that's a really good point. So he starts off with the Crusades and basically says the church got really out of tune with Jesus's beautiful melody of love God and love your neighbor. And then he goes back to early church history and shows us how different people responded to power in different ways. Shows us how Ambrose, his approach to power wasn't very good. And I really liked that bit, because I was like, yes, because some of you know power is something that I've been studying for quite a few years, and I've done some biblical theologies following the themes of power throughout the scriptures. And I often felt like some of the problems we have in the church with a capital C today is because the way we've approached church history and the way we've handled power, we've never properly fully grasped the way we've misused power and not learned from that. And so it was really helpful to see him say about what Ambrose got wrong, and also to see him talk about the Cappadocian brothers and their older sister. I didn't realize about their older sister, the influence she'd had on them and their approach to helping the poor and stuff. So that was really helpful. It goes through other stuff. Obviously, he goes through other stuff. He goes through a ton of stuff. Gives some surprising information about the Spanish Inquisition that I wasn't prepared for, which was really interesting. And the whole time, I read the audiobook, listened to the audiobook, and he's narrating it. He's got a wonderful voice as he narrates it. The whole time, he's just very gentle. And the way he presents stuff, I just think is a wonderful example to all of us. He doesn't sound combative. He doesn't sound argumentative. He's admitting when Christians got it wrong. He's admitting about Martin Luther's anti-Semitism and stuff, and so that is just really refreshing. But at the same time, he doesn't have a problem with mentioning, hey, the French Revolution was incredibly bloody and that wasn't driven by religion. He also talks about sectarian violence in Northern Ireland, and whether that was actually religion-based or something else. And it's just a great book. If you like church history, I think you'll enjoy the book. If you have questions about how comes there's so many abuses of power in the church, I think you'll enjoy the book as well. I think it helps think through that historically. And I love the book. It was only at the end when I was kind of surprised and a bit disappointed, because I felt like at the very end, John kind of lost that same carefulness that he'd approached other issues in the past. So at the very end, he mentions briefly about statue toppling in the United States. And he mentions how there, could be some self-righteousness in that, in us not seeing that there's things that we think are okay today that future generations will say that was not okay. And he raises some good points about things like society's attitude to porn and society's attitude towards money, materialism, good points. But with all the careful research he'd done before and the sensitivity he took to talking about different issues, I was disappointed that he didn't bring up the fact that, a good number of people have said in the last couple of years that, I've heard African Americans say, I'm walking to college, and as I go into college, there's a statue of a slave trader who traded my ancestors. And that feels really weird going into college like that. John didn't mention that at all. So to kind of attribute it to self-righteousness, I thought was just out of kilter with the whole rest of the book. And I would love if there was a second edition, if that bit there got treated with a bit more sensitivity, especially if when he's talking about statue toppling, he's not actually talking about what the church does, but he's talking about wider society. Then again, I think it's not consistent with how he approached describing what Muslim soldiers did in the Crusades. When at the same time he was so careful to keep saying that, what the Christian soldiers did was totally out of order. And so that was, because it was at the end of the book, you always remember the end, innit, the most. So it kind of finished the book deflated. But the whole rest of the time I was listening to the book, I was like, this is banging. And I do highly recommend the book. I definitely recommend this book. It's called Bullies and Saints by John Dickson. The audio book is phenomenal. I'm sure reading the book would be really good as well. Let me also say, if you're wondering, is he comfortable on that sofa like that? No, not really. He seemed proper comfortable in the shop. And it's always when you get home in it. Hey, you sit in it and you're like, oh, so I've got a cushion behind me, because otherwise you're just kind of like totally like this, like you're in a lowrider. But even like this, I don't feel that amazingly comfortable. So yeah, just to answer your question, if you're wondering that.